Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to If Data Could Talk. I am your host, Andy Cockgreave, technical evangelist at Tableau. And this week, we've got two great guests from ProPublica. They're the authors and creators of a really interesting piece of data journalism showing the upticks or downticks of cases across cases of COVID-19 across the US. It's one of these rebounding, persisting stories of the pandemic, and they've told the story in a really great way. At the top of the piece, they've got an engaging animated visualization showing you what's happening in a state. And then below that, they've got a detailed scorecard showing the situation in a lot more detail for each of the US states. So we're going to talk about how they created the visualizations, why they've gone for two different styles at the top and in the main piece, and some of the persistent COVID-19 data-related stories. I hope that sounds good. I'm excited about it. So let's meet our guests. Lena and Ash, welcome to the show. Lena, nice to have you here. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure, yeah. Thanks for having me. My name is Lena Groger. I work at ProPublica, and I'm a news apps developer. I make interactive graphics, data visualizations, other kinds of storytelling. And the most recent project was challenging. We will talk about, but also pretty fun, and hopefully kind of gives people a sense of how things are going up or down in the country regarding COVID-19.
Right, thanks. And Ash, welcome along. Say hi and tell us about yourself.
I'm Ash New. I also work for ProPublica, also a news app developer. This was the first project that Lena and I worked on together, and it's something that I think we're both happy to see out in the world and see that people have some use out of it. So
great. And Lena, just for anybody who isn't familiar with ProPublica, can you give us a little bit of background to the publication?
Sure, yeah. So it's an online only. We're an investigative newsroom and do projects ranging from kind of long form written pieces to the news apps team. We do a lot of graphics and news apps, big interactive databases, letting people look up data to tell their own story. We try to have impact in our work. That means either, changing laws. Sometimes it means giving other journalists tools to tell stories of their own local areas. Hopefully that's a good summary.
And you've certainly been doing some really impactful stuff. I've loved following the growth of the site over the years. So thanks for joining today. So we're going to do this in two sections, talk about the visualization, break down the viz, and then talk about the story itself. So let's talk about the viz, right? We've got two pieces and we're looking at US cases. So Ash, can you just give us a brief background about the data and what you're trying to show in this article?
Yeah, so the data comes from mostly two sources, one being the COVID tracking project, which is kind of forked out of The Atlantic. There are a few reporters there who really took it upon themselves to aggregate all this information from different states about their coronavirus stats. And then the other source of data was the CDC, which provides some information about hospital capacities and ILI, so like influenza-like illness, those percentages as well. Right. And those two sets of data we're just using to kind of keep track of what the state of coronavirus is in each state. Is it going up? Is it going down? I think especially in the US with such different policies within the country, with each particular state, we're seeing pretty different trends across the country.
Yeah, so Lena, let's talk about the sort of how you chose to visualize those trends, because it's very much a two-level piece, right? You've got this really eye-catching animation, and then the scorecard. So can you explain a little bit about the background, the genesis of that decision, and maybe how the animation works as well? Why it's so eye-catching?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we really tried. We were trying to kind of answer one question, which was, are things getting better or worse in my state? And we had seen a lot of graphics out there, a lot of small multiples of 20 different charts, trying to get a handle on like how things were going. And so we tried to go kind of the opposite approach, like simplify everything down into, at first we just were using trend lines. And then ultimately I kind of just wanted to see like, well, I just want to see what's the, or we were showing cases over time, or sort of little mini charts. We wanted just to see like, okay, but are they going up or down? And so we overlaid an arrow. And from there, this idea of just taking out everything else and just showing the arrow was kind of born. I think it both conveys some kind of nuance. You can see, whether the arrow is going way up or way down, in a way that just if we had done like a color coding, like red or green or something, wouldn't have given you maybe that nuance. But that, it was sort of the impulse for that. We wanted to boil it down to its the most simple way to answer that question.
And that's a key thing, because I guess the top part, the top piece, the piece that people will see on social media when they first look at your piece, that's got to be something that grabs people in the instant, right?
Right. Yeah.
So so that reduction's key, and then you can bring in the detail for those that want to go further. And those arrows are going pretty steeply up in quite a lot of US states now. How many iterations did you have to go through before you sort of finalize this, the final piece? Lena,
a lot. Yeah, sure. Yeah. We did a number of, like, as I mentioned, we sort of experimented with showing, the various metrics, like positive percentage of cases, positive cases per capita. So that was its whole thing. Then we also sort of experimented with putting all of the each state in a cartogram, which we ultimately went with. But for a while, we were thinking maybe of dividing up all states into open and closed. And actually, that was a decision that we ended up changing the day before we published. We actually had this color coded, or at least black or white, basically whether states were open or closed. And it ultimately became too much of a task to try to determine exactly what stay-at-home order meant in one state versus what did open mean.
Yeah.
Picking metrics like, are the restaurants open, seemed kind of arbitrary. So we decided just to kind of go with one color. Yeah.
Yeah. And Ash, I know you I guess, did you think about whether it should be animated as well? Did you, because you added a scrubber after the event rather than just an animation? Is that right?
Oh, that was Lena.
Right.
The scrubber was Lena's implementation, but it was an idea that we both had, I think, just in looking at the arrows and just wondering how they've changed over time, because we had all of the data. And so I remember Lena mocked it up and we looked at it and we're like, yeah, this is really compelling to just, especially with when you're thinking back in March, you see New York really peaking and everybody else staying pretty flat in comparison. And then now it's, the tables have really turned.
Yeah. And tell me about I find any data storytelling, you have to make, I don't know, difficult decisions, right? Because what you said, Lena, is it's one simple question. So on the animation level, you have answered one simple question. And sometimes the outcome of that can be people's reaction is, yes, but it should have shown X, or yes, but it should have shown Y. And I don't think people always realize that, the designers probably thought about all of those questions. And, your decision is to try and hone in on one question. So have you had feedback like that? Like, why didn't it show X? Ash, I see you're nodding.
Yeah, I mean, we got some feedback from people who thought that the testing numbers weren't accurate enough to really give a good sense of the trends in different states. There was one person in particular who emailed us. They were an epidemiologist, and they said that we should be looking more at hospital trends, whether or not people are, being in the ICU, on ventilators, and that sort of thing. But the one thing about those stats is that those stats are also dependent on, people testing positive. Otherwise, how do you count if a person with COVID has landed in the hospital? And also those hospitalization numbers tend to be a little bit more delayed than the testing numbers, just by virtue of the fact that, people might test positive earlier than they end up in the hospital.
Yeah. So, you know what, let's talk about the data, because I think you've already both said some fascinating things about this, right? Just picking up on that Ash, how, as a journalist or as a citizen, do we even know what data we have to look at to answer the question about what is COVID-19 doing in my country or my state? How hard has that challenge been? Lena, do you?
Sure, yeah, I'll take a stab at it. I mean, the original thinking for the project was because you're exactly right. There are a million ways to measure this. There were some guidelines put forward by the White House, basically saying if states adhere to these 5 metrics, there were already sort of caveats within that. But essentially, here are 5 things that you can be tracking that would indicate like you're ready for the next step or something in reopening. And so that's kind of where we started. We were like, well, how do we answer the question of like trends, cases going up or down? Okay, well, we have, positive tests, we have total number of tests, like what are the things we have? And then how do we kind of address each of those metrics? So we started with that. But yeah, ultimately, if you dig down into any of these metrics, everybody, we're all dependent on state to state reporting. Everybody's dealing with fast moving information that, especially early on, was changing like by the hour. States are trying to come up with systems of reporting and kind of chains of information that is all new.
Yeah.
And on the same end, journalists are trying to make sense of this new data and all kind of like competing in the same space to try to figure out like ways to show the same stuff in like a novel way. So it's a very hectic and kind of messy, just arena that you're dealing with.
Yeah, and actually, you said the data you're getting here is from the COVID-19 or the COVID tracking project, which started from the Atlantic, and it's amazing, isn't it, that some of the most rigorous data sets come from citizen created or journalist created. And it's like, well, why is that? I think part of that is day to day we're just not prepared for a pandemic, so we don't collect pandemic related data. But then you get in the situation and you realize just how challenging these situations are. I don't know if you know, in the UK, the government just announced this week that they've just given up trying to count how many people have been tested for COVID-19 because they've just like, we can't do it. So we're not going to tell you how many people have been tested because we don't know. They know how many tests. Well, they have an idea how many tests they've done, but they don't know how many people they've tested. And it's a kind of free for all in the press in the UK because the anti-government press are going, what the hell are they doing? They don't know anything. And then the pro-government press are going, well, this is reasonable because we just never had this system set up. So it's difficult, right? How can you talk about the COVID tracking project, Ash? Just about a bit more about how that data set has been collated and how reliable you think it is?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't count myself as an expert on it, but from what I understand, it's a bunch of folks who, I think it's a mix of volunteers and a mix of paid staff who literally every day are just checking the state's websites and looking at the number of positive tests, the number of total tests, and any other metrics that they happen to be tracking. And then taking a screenshot and uploading those numbers to a spreadsheet. So it's a massive collaborative project. And it's really incredible that I think people were able to just manage that sort of thing. I've personally never been part of a project that has that many players in it. And I think to do so in a way that's open source and not even just like internal to your organization is remarkable. I will say that the data, the states, you'll notice in some of our scorecards for some states, we'll have a box that says like this data is not available or it's not reliable at this point in time. And that's because some states are changing their numbers and going sort of retroactively and saying, oh, wait, like we screwed up something. There are like actually 10,000 fewer tests than we think there are. Or the opposite, there are more tests. And so you'll see these large fluctuations in the data, which don't align, like they don't make a sensible story, or they're not like actually reflective of what's happening in the world, but that's just the way that the data comes out.
And so, on the site, you've got the sort of grading A to F on data quality plus the annotations. What appetite do you think your audiences have, or general audiences have, for digging into that reality? Do you think people are more keen just to see one number, or do they really want to dig in? And has that changed in COVID-19 pandemic times? Lena?
I think it really depends
on. Ash, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think it really depends on how skeptical people are, and that I think, at least in the U.S., I think there's been a lot of talk about, how trustworthy are these numbers, not only from the government but from media. And so I think a healthy skepticism is good. I think people should be interested in where the numbers are coming from, and that they should interrogate the sources of the information that they're receiving. But I also know that, some people, they just don't necessarily have the time to do so. So I think we try and, give those asterisks and notes for people who do want to look at the source of data, and then also just give those top line numbers.
That's fun. And Lena, do you have any additions to that, or also about how maybe the nature of the story that people want to read has changed in the last 3-4 months?
Well, I was going to say that I do think that, there's clearly a variety of interest levels. And so if you just want to see the top line numbers and then, I don't know, make some decision off that, great. We've also then gotten lots of emails some emails from people being like, I refresh the page every day or every half hour to see if, et cetera. And they're, I think, more deeply kind of going into the different metrics. I think what this is shown, though, is sort of both the upside of data is that it can kind of hopefully spur behavioral change. Like, you see the arrow going up and maybe you decide not to leave the house that day or something. But that also all of this data is really on a delay. And so what we're seeing is sort of 2 weeks in the past. And that, I think, has maybe been a downside, in that it's given people, especially after, a couple weeks of the lockdown, a lot of the numbers were, or that, all the arrows were going flatter. People were kind of feeling more confident. And I think we didn't get the delay in the reaction to that was too late to kind of do anything. And I kind of worry that's what we're going to see now with deaths. Deaths have been going down while cases are going up, but those all obviously, it happens a couple of weeks later. So it's sort of both we're dealing with the best data we have, but also it's not really the appropriate data to make current decisions. It's sort of, it lags.
I think, and you've got data clashing with human nature as well, haven't you? We all just want to go back to some sort of normality, but
you hope we could all use the data from other countries, right? Especially at the beginning, I think there was, okay, well, let's look at China, let's look at Italy, and kind of take that as a warning sign. I don't know, maybe it's American exceptionalism. We all thought that the U.S. was different in some way.
Well, let's not go down that path just now. So if you're updating this page every day, is that right?
Yeah.
And did you plan to make any more changes about on the page, or if there was something you look at it now and think, oh, if only we'd done X or Y? What are the plans for the page? Ash, any?
There's been a little bit of chatter. I know with our editor Ken has, sometimes comes with ideas. Elena, do you remember any of them in particular?
No, I think, well, we threw around a lot of different things, especially right after it came out. We actually made a big change the day after it came out. We changed the arrows were showing. Yeah, well, it was, we were showing positive test percentage. So basically, of all the tests that are done, how many come back positive. And then the day after we published this, the Atlantic came out. Actually, the people who run the COVID tracking project had found that a lot of states were conflating viral tests and antibody tests. And I won't go into too much detail, but basically those can tend to show different things within the population and can skew the numbers in a way that is favorable to states. And so we decided to go instead with positive tests per capita. So that basically eliminated the denominator. We didn't need to know total tests. But I think, I don't know. We're both on other projects now.
Right.
So one thing Ken has suggested, and this is not a data thing. This is more just running a publication. The scorecards that we have, they're all on a single page, and you either have to like pick a state at the top or scroll or like use the drop down. And Ken was just interested in potentially having separate pages for each one that you could just like automatically come to the scorecard that you care about every day. But that's not particularly like an interesting data viz question.
Fair enough. I'll tell you. So I think that was the last question I had for this section, and I think, we have internal channels at Tableau where people post visualizations they see in the wild, and there's certain classifications. There's some of them are posted because they're just the awful visualizations that's just like, my gosh, how on earth did this happen? Then there are other ones which are great but generate no conversation, and then there's the ones which the ProPublica article fell into, where people post it, and then there's this, yes, but why did they do this? Why did they do that? Why did they do that? And not from a position of criticism, but just from what happens is I see it, I engage, I get something, but then I think, well, what next? What next? And I love that about any piece of data journalism, because it shows you've made conscious decisions to do X and Y, and it's made people think about the next 3 steps. So just on that, congratulations for getting internally a Tableau are people engaged in that. So if you haven't checked it out, those watching, do go check it out. The links will be somewhere. How do they do this on YouTube? They point like this, right? Somewhere down below. Well, it's time to share things that you, the audience, could be reading, watching, or listening to. And I'm still here with Ash and Lena from ProPublica. Each week we ask our guests to tell us what we should be looking at, what's hot around the internet. So Lena, what should everybody be looking at this week?
Well, Ash and I have the same suggestion, but we came to this independently, I will add. I was going to add Mona Chalabi's work and realize that Ash has already put it in there. But no, she's a data visualizer. She does a lot of hand-drawn data visualizations and stories, and recently did a piece in the New York Times called 100 New Yorkers that kind of talks about the inequalities in New York through illustrations of different people that kind of represent different small segments of the population. She also did a poster series in New York around the money spent for the NYPD, and kind of put these posters on bridges in New York, kind of representing, the amount of time it takes you to walk the length of this bridge. The NYPD spent XYZ amounts of money, and I think her kind of combination of both kind of physical visualizations and hand-drawn illustrations kind of give I haven't seen a lot of people do it that way, and it's really refreshing.
And there's something really special about it. And I think, Ash, what is it you think? What is it you think that creates the really effectiveness of what Mona's doing with that sort of data plus hand-drawn approach? How do you think it manifests itself successfully?
I think as someone who does a lot of, I would say, like neutral, but like not actually neutral data visualization, in the sense that it's just kind of rectangles, lines, squares, circles, very just cut and dry standard shapes. It ends up being, if the topic that you're making a chart on is quite sad, or maybe it's a happy topic, there's some emotionality to it that's lost when you just rely on these shapes. And I think what is really special about Mona's work is that she defies all those expectations, like puts all different types of, like, she'll have a hand that's drawn and make that be a kind of bar chart, or she'll use different, like, the heights of people. I remember seeing one about like the average age between men and women. Actually, what was all I remember, see, this is how my brain works, is just I remember a woman that was shorter and a man that was taller, and I think it was the average age that people get married at or something like that. I can't remember.
I think that was right. Yeah.
But that's the sort of thing that I think, when you have these very vibrant illustrations and symbols, you can remember the information better because it's not just something that has fewer of those cues. And she's one of the few people that I think are doing that type of work. And I think even within ProPublica, I wish that we would do more of that stuff. I want to like break out colored pencils and illustrations and kind of involve more of that. But I do think that there's this kind of sense that it's maybe less objective or
less precise.
Precise.
I think she started work as a data journalist at The Guardian in the data blog way back in 2012, 2011, 2013-ish. And her path is amazing. And I remember, my own journey through data visualization. At the start, I was a disciple of Stephen Few, and it's like everything has to be rectangles and pure and pristine and austere because we've got to see the data accurately. And it took me years. It took me years of lambasting David McCandless. It's like, how dare you create this information in this beautiful book, which is so inaccurate, right? And then eventually you realize it's like, oh, hang on. Data visualization, it doesn't have to be accurate. Sometimes you are going for emotion. Sometimes you're going for reaction. And what Mona recognizes as well is that sometimes you have inaccurate data. So a stark rectangle with a solid edge conveys way more certainty in the data than you might have access to. So I love that. And I actually asked the other link, apart from those two specific projects, you talked about you wanted to talk about her Instagram account as well. Is that a place?
Oh, I was using her Instagram account as like sort of her profile of work, not necessarily anything specific about her Instagram. Yeah.
She's very prolific.
She's very prolific on social media.
Yeah. The Instagram is a great account. Excellent. So go check out Mona's work and Mona's accounts. And again, links will be somewhere on the page you all look at consuming this video in. The thing I've got is from the UN. Last week, they shared a new data strategy and a data vision for 2022 and beyond, right? Now, I don't know, Lena and Ash, how often you do data strategies internally at ProPublica, but in our business world at Tableau, it's very key. A lot of our customers are trying to do this. What I love about this and why I want everybody to go and read it is because it's about a 50-page PDF, but they have 17 key recommendations on page 3. So I'm going to ask you both a quiz here. Of those 17 key recommendations, how many are about technology? Lena?
None.
Ash?
2.
2. It's dead right. It is 2, right? It is 2. So you obviously are visionary data strategist because the almost every data strategy we see customers build is about building the technology, getting the processes right, building the data warehouse, blah, 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 blah. And yet they forget the most important thing because the other 15 are all about people, processes, and data literacy. And I just love that at that highest level, they've recognized that it's like they've got the tools. They have the tools. The tools to fight, to have that, use the data are all there, even if it's just Excel. But what they haven't got is the people skills. So, I mean, that's kind of, again, a data journalism. You're trying to build literacy among your readers, I guess. Are you seeing a change in literacy, Lena?
I was going to say sort of about echoing the irrelevance of tools. I think a lot of times this comes up too, and sort of anyone entering this field is sort of like, what should I learn? Like, what should I learn? JavaScript? Should I learn R? And I think it's good to be reminded that the tools ultimately don't really matter. It's just how you get to what you want to do, which is the actual kind of project itself. And if you have a good project, then like you'll get there. You'll figure out how to make the map, et cetera. It's sort of figuring out what to map. So I think I'm in agreement with the UN there.
Yeah.
I mean, I think
go ahead, Ash.
I was just going to say, I think it's interesting how tools shape what we end up doing. For instance, I think this is kind of a segue, but I think a lot of buildings nowadays look like they've just been plopped out of CAD software. They're like very rectangular. They have these just sort of, default settings that you can see in a lot of CAD software. And I think that really, just the ease of access to that means that people aren't necessarily innovating in other ways outside of that particular set of tools that are in that software.
And that's a really good lead back to what Mona is doing, because she doesn't even need a tool to do what she needs pens, right?
Right.
Everybody has yeah. And so the visualizations and the ideas you create from a pen can inform, certainly some of the most creative things I've ever done have come from this first. So excellent point, Ash. I like it. Right. I think that is a good place to stop. So we've got Mona Chalabi's account. Go check out the UN's data strategy, and also make sure you check out ProPublica's piece on the growing or shrinking cases of COVID across the US. So with that, Lena and Ash, thanks so much for your time and all your insights. It's been a really fascinating interview. I hope you've enjoyed watching this episode. Do please let us know what you think on the comments. We've got lots of more links and resources in the comments below. And with that, enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye. Thanks for having us.